Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Ukraine is facing growing pressure over calls for new presidential and parliamentary elections, with both the United States and Russia advocating for them to take place. According to Politico, Ukrainian officials are concerned that this may hinder their ability to shape an agreement to end the ongoing war. Over the weekend, the US President's special envoy, Keith Kellogg, emphasized the importance of elections, suggesting that even in wartime, democratic processes must continue. Russian Presidential Spokesman Dmitry Peskov echoed this view, arguing that the legitimacy of Ukraine's leadership is essential for any peace negotiations. Well, to explore the reasoning behind this move by the US, we're joined by Aleksander Cwalina, his assistant director at the Atlantic Council. Welcome, sir, to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. So, this has come out of left field, hasn't it? Ukraine's mired in a war, defending itself from Russia's aggression, and suddenly the US and Russia are asking for it to hold elections. What's going on?
Thank you. This is a very important discussion that's happening both in the ground and in Washington. As it currently stands, elections in Ukraine are, in my opinion, out of the question. It makes little sense to hold nationwide elections before peacetime, as more than 6 million Ukrainians are living abroad. Nearly 4 million are internally displaced, and some 1 million are currently serving in the armed forces. This is not also including those suffering under Russian occupation. And in my opinion, at this stage, elections would be more destabilizing than affirming of the potential of Ukraine's democracy. The potential elections in the next coming months, as indicated, would serve as a prime target for Russia, which would most likely target voting centers or launch massive hybrid warfare attacks to disrupt the process. This is exactly the same playbook Russia has used in other countries to sow instability and promote pro-Russian narratives into chaos.
Well, absolutely. So why is Keith Kellogg calling for them?
I think it is, as you mentioned, reaffirming of Ukraine's democracy to hold elections and to open up the question for leadership of Ukraine. However, even Keith Kellogg himself specified that it is preferable to hold these elections after a ceasefire. And it is, in my opinion, that such a ceasefire should be durable and stable to allow Ukrainians to truly have a voice in who to lead their country in a fair and democratic process.
Well, that seems to make sense. But then, we're going around in circles, aren't we? Putin is saying they can't negotiate anything, and I assume that includes a ceasefire, with Zelensky because he's not legitimate. So is this simply a delaying tactic by Putin to continue with the war, or is he angling for some other concessions?
It could 100% be a delaying tactic on Putin's end. He is known to set unrealistic expectations, as even in the lead up of the war, one of the outlined concessions that he expected from NATO countries is to withdraw all equipment and troops for countries that joined after 9/11, and then blame the West for not following those exact instructions. So this is fully in Putin's toolbox to make these unrealistic demands, make these concessions to Ukraine's democracy and how Ukraine handles both its domestic and international relations before beginning as a prelude to peace talks. And then it is fully likely that Putin is just setting this incredibly high bar that he knows Ukrainian officials won't accept, that even officials in Washington are skeptical of, to then blame the West and Kiev specifically on not meeting those demands to continue the war and seek a better term for Moscow.
Understood. Now, President Trump has been very clear, has he not, that he is very keen to get this war ended as soon as possible. If Putin's delaying tactics continue, do you think there's a possibility that Trump is going to simply say, well, you're going to have to pay a price, whether it be in terms of even more sanctions or whether it be in terms of arming Ukraine even more heavily with modern weapons?
It is fully possible Putin is going to take Trump a little too far and push his limits to get a more likely peace. But I see optimism in Trump's statements in both Davos, Switzerland last week, and also his statements on Truth Social, in which he recognizes that Russia's economy is flailing and is doing much worse than previous, and also that he is willing to use sanctions and tariffs on Russia to further movement towards a possible peace or a ceasefire. I mean, we've seen these past weeks that Trump is not shy to use economic statecraft or tariffs against even American partners to extract concessions, and many around the circle and in Washington are urging him to take a similar bold approach to Russia to get what's best for both Ukraine's interests but also Washington's interests.
Understood. Now, President Zelensky has said that if peace talks take place, he wants 4 people or organizations or countries represented. He wants the EU involved, of course, the US and Russia, and, of course, Ukraine. What do you see, or what does he see the EU's role in these talks to be?
The EU has been an indispensable partner for Ukraine during its war, and it is important to know as well that Ukraine is an aspirant country to join the European Union. There's been sort of discussions on sort of whether or not the United States plays a security role for Ukraine while the EU plays an economic development and post-war reconstruction mode. I think both the United States and the EU have important roles to play in both fields, but the European Union is best suited to encourage security and economic development for Ukraine, both right now and after the war, as it has during the war. And it's also important to note that who's going to maintain a stable ceasefire and to encourage a stable peace in Ukraine. There have been plans floated that include, for example, European troops on the ground in Ukraine, maintaining a possible ceasefire or maintaining that a peace in Ukraine holds. And I think this is an important role that the European Union and member states within the European Union can play. And as such, the European Union should have a role at the table in possible negotiations.
It sounds as though you're excluding US troops from such a peacekeeping force. Are you?
It's difficult to tell at the moment. Obviously, U.S. troops on the ground would be. It is an incredibly controversial, especially right now with the way that Trump is looking at disengaging from conflicts or at least ending conflicts. I believe that will be a controversial move for Americans and the United States. However, Keith Kellogg mentioned in this week that he will unveil what a possible peace plan or future avenues to peace during the Munich Security Conference, which is happening next week, and also that he plans to visit Kiev in mid-February. So I think it's still a little too early to tell on what a possible outline for the U.S. role in a ceasefire and a peace plan for Ukraine might look. But I would expect that we would see more clarity on that in the next couple of weeks.
Well, we should certainly be watching that carefully. Now, U.S. Senator Marco Rubio suggested that Ukraine will have to make compromises to end the war. Well, it sounds as though President Zelensky is already making compromises. He started by saying that he wouldn't speak to Russia about peace or even a ceasefire until all Ukrainian land was unoccupied. However, he's shown an inclination to meet the Russians around the table. So he's already making compromises. What else do you think Senator Rubio might be asking for?
I think current statements from the White House and from Secretary Rubio indicate that Washington is preparing this sort of carrot and stick approach to both Russia and Ukraine for a possible ceasefire, and that both sides have to make concessions towards peace. On Russia, this includes, for example, the sanctions and tariffs that I mentioned prior, but also to appease Russia, a possible moratorium on NATO membership and cessation of territory. Zelensky indicated prior that he will at least not consider this cessation of territory legal under Ukrainian, but under Ukrainian in the Ukrainian perspective. But still, time will tell on what exact concessions both sides are attempting to extract in the following weeks.
Yes, now a slightly broader question, if I may. I mean, in terms of international law, clearly Russia has been in breach. Is it not risky allowing Russia's actions to stand in exchange for peace? Is it not sending out the wrong message to other countries who might wish to occupy parts of other countries around the world? Not too dangerous to do this, is it?
I believe acknowledging that is the primary fear of a lot of Ukrainians on the ground, is that if we acknowledge Russian occupation of another sovereign country's territories and make that either legal or acceptable in the international sphere, that a lot of the partners that have been now recognized, even by Keith Kellogg, as the rising axis of authoritarian powers, which includes in it Russia, China, and North Korea, will see this as a green light to do similar maneuvers in the neighbors or with other countries. For example, a lot of folks are currently looking at what China is going to do in relation to Taiwan, and if it becomes a norm that, for example, that one country can take another country's sovereign territory, and then we might add a couple of sanctions, we might add tariffs, and then once they back off, we decide, okay, we'll ease the sanctions, we'll ease the tariffs, and all you have to do is just hold on for 2 years. I think that sets a very dangerous precedent for not only Europe and Russia's further goals, using their aggressive rhetoric towards the Baltic countries and then Poland too, but also in Asia with how China is looking towards Taiwan and other countries in the region.
Well, certainly, I mean, with China, you mentioned China, of course, Tibet is an example, but also incursions into the border area with India is another area of concern. I mean, this is not new for Russia. They occupy parts of Georgia, for example, already, parts of Romania and so on, Moldova, I beg your pardon. So, yeah, it seems to be part of Putin's playbook. But we shall be watching very carefully how things unfold. But in the meantime, Mr. Cwalina, thank you very much indeed for coming along and sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
You as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.